Both the prosecution and the defense have gone back to their seats. Let's listen in as Judge Deborah Nelson gets things underway for the defense's section of opening statements.
Let's go ahead and bring the jurors back in. Please be seated. The record will reflect the presence of the jury. Mr. West, you may proceed.
This is a sad case, of course. As one of your fellow jurors commented during the jury selection process, a young man lost his life, another is fighting for his. There are no winners here. How profound and how insightful. Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin are grieving parents. Without question, they have the right to grieve. They have the right to feel the way they feel. George Zimmerman's parents also are grieving. You see Trayvon Martin's parents, Mr. Martin and Ms. Fulton, here in the courtroom. They're seated right over here. They're likely to be witnesses in the case. You don't see Mr. Zimmerman's parents here, though. They would be seated over here, the way the courtroom has been constructed. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that they are on the witness list. They may testify, they may not. As you know from the beginning of this, there's a couple of hundred people on there, and certainly not all of them will testify. But because they might, and because they are not related to the deceased, then they're not allowed in the courtroom now. That's the reason. Not that they aren't here, not that they aren't, in fact, right around the corner in a room wishing they could be. That includes Mr. Zimmerman's wife, Shelley, and other family members. Any witnesses, unless there's a specific exclusion that they may sit in the courtroom, cannot. I grew up in a family that had certainly moments of great joy and moments of profound sadness. There's no doubt all of us have had in one form or another. And my mother used to, actually she still says, if she gets a chance.
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper argument during opening statements.
Sustained. It's personalizing. It's supposed to be what the evidence will show.
Well, I think the evidence will show that this is a sad case, that there are no monsters here. Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. So let me, at considerable risk, let me say, I'd like to tell you a little joke. I know how that may sound a bit weird in this context under these circumstances. But I think you're the perfect audience for it. As long as you if you don't like it or you don't think it's funny or inappropriate, that you don't hold it against Mr. Zimmerman. You can hold it against me if you want, but not Mr. Zimmerman. I have your assurance you won't. Here's how it goes. Knock, knock. Who's there? George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman, who? All right, good. You're on the jury. Nothing? That's funny. After what you folks have been through the last 2 or 3 weeks? Let's get on to, however, the serious business of why we're here. Let's take a look at where all of this started. George Zimmerman is not guilty of murder. He shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense after being viciously attacked. And here's the evidence that will show you how and why it happened the way it did. I've got some things to display for you that will help. Some of them will be up there too. Is this okay? All right. Oh, sorry. Okay, what you're looking at is an aerial view of the complex in Sanford. It's over near the Seminole Town Center there, called Retreat at Twin Lakes. This is basically the whole thing. Just as a bit of orientation, George Zimmerman lived down here in this area. This street is called Retreat View Circle. Sometimes people use that interchangeably with the complex name. The complex is Retreat at Twin Lakes. This is Retreat View Circle. Here is the clubhouse. You can see the pool right here. This is considered the main entrance. And this is known as the back entrance. So we have the main entrance here, there's a gate, and the back entrance here. I guess you can get in either way, of course. The pool, there's some mailboxes around here for the community. And I think this is called Twin Lakes or Twin Trees, this street that cuts through here. You'll hear a lot of testimony about the T intersection, the T. That simply is where two sidewalks connect perpendicularly. That's where almost all of the important events took place, within just a few feet of that. Let me point that out to you here, and we have a better picture to focus. This is it. Sometimes this is called the dog path or the dog walk, and there's the T right here. You can see over here is, again, Retreat View Circle, and this can be a cut through. So you can, if you're walking, come right through here between these rows of houses, go down this way if you want to get to this area, or continue on through if you want to get to Retreat View Circle. These are the backs of the houses. The fronts facing the street, the backs. They all have patios. They're all basically the same floor plan townhomes. They have patios. Some of them have screened-in porches. Some don't. This is the back of this row of houses here. So As George Zimmerman left his house in his Honda Ridgeline truck to go to Target to get some groceries for his lunches for work. This was a Sunday night, February 26, 2012, in the neighborhood of 7 o'clock. In fact, just a few minutes after 7. George Zimmerman leaves his house in his truck and goes out here to get to the exit on his way to Target. He sees a person that later becomes known, of course, as Trayvon Martin, coming into the community, not through the gate, but cutting through the houses, standing in a place where people that live there wouldn't typically come into the community. There's a big, let me show you. Some of these turn out better than others. Just to get sort of oriented a bit. You may have some difficulty. Reinhardt Road. The complex right here is over here. The main entrance is off here, the back entrance over here. This is a big apartment complex. I think it's called Colonial Villages. Over here is the 7-Eleven. That's where Trayvon Martin went to buy the snacks. So to get from here to here, you can come this way and up, or you can cut through this path that cuts off sort of the triangle and go up here. About a mile. I know that's hard to see. It's about a mile from here to here. You can also cut through these apartments if you want to save a little distance. You can cut through these apartments and just go right through the gully up into the complex over in here. You can see part of the other complex here. So George Zimmerman sees Trayvon Martin in a spot and he caught his attention, caught George Zimmerman's attention. Little did George Zimmerman know at the time that in less than 10 minutes from him first seeing Trayvon Martin, that he, George Zimmerman, would be sucker punched in the face, have his head pounded on concrete, and wind up shooting and tragically killing Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman participated in Neighborhood Watch. The community asked him to do that, to be the liaison with the Sanford Police Department. Wendy Dorval is the person with Sanford that coordinates all of that. She comes out to homeowners upon requests and gives a presentation, PowerPoints, literature. She wants a point person, if you will. Not a captain, a liaison, someone they can email, someone that can help distribute the flyers that she prepares, and to coordinate the Neighborhood Watch effort in the community. Ms. Dorval knew there was increased crime activity in this particular community over the several months prior to this event. There had been a number of burglaries. She can tell by crime mapping that crime was on the rise, that people were stealing things. There had even been a home invasion, and that the homeowners association was interested in forming a Neighborhood Watch. This is late summer, early fall of 2011. George Zimmerman had been active in the community and was asked to help coordinate that. So he did. There's some emails back and forth and such. No patrols were set up. George Zimmerman wasn't patrolling this night or any other night. But people were told if they see something suspicious to phone it in. Call the police. If you think there's a crime taking place, you call 911. If you don't necessarily think there's a crime taking place, but since you are the ears and the eyes of the community and you want to bring the person or the event to the attention of law enforcement, you have a separate number. That's the non-emergency number that you've heard about. It was recorded, and we're going to play it here in just a few minutes. George Zimmerman called the non-emergency number and described for the dispatcher, a fellow by the name of Sean Nofke, what he was seeing as he was seeing it. Mr. Nofke was asking questions. Mr. Zimmerman was giving answers. You will hear the tone of voice. You will hear both sides of the conversation. And assign whatever meaning ultimately you think they have, if any, in the overall context of this. So what we did, let me draw your attention to something before we actually play the recording. There's been a lot of publicity, some of you may have even heard it, that George Zimmerman was in his car and was told not to follow Trayvon Martin, and he did anyway. That is absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. And you will hear that on the call we're going to play. You'll hear the conversation. You'll hear, as Mr. Guy pointed out, the chime. You can hear Mr. Zimmerman opening the door. You can hear the door shut, if I'm not mistaken, and you will know on our timeline exactly when that happened in reference to everything else. You'll know when George Zimmerman got out of the car, and you'll know what he was doing when the call ended. But there's something else, though, to keep in mind, because we put a little timeline together that shows the sequence of events on the non-emergency call. But we also connected up the call from a woman named Rachel Gentile. Rachel Gentile is a person that has been variously described as Trayvon Martin's girlfriend. She was clearly a friend, although not a girlfriend, but they had been communicating pretty regularly on the phone and by text for a couple of weeks. And that Trayvon Martin had spent a lot of time on the phone with her this particular day and the days preceding it while he was up in Sanford. So that calls, actually. There was a call that started before Mr. Zimmerman's non-emergency call and then ended at a point that we'll show you. And then there was a gap of about 20 seconds, more or less, where the call with Ms. Gentile ended, and then it started up again at about 7:12 and some change. So there was only about 20 seconds there. However, George Zimmerman is still on the phone with the police during that gap. And then the call reconnects, and it's a continuous call between Trayvon Martin and Ms. Gentile until 7:15:43, roughly. We'll connect that with the first call to 911 made by the resident who lives right here. The times are written on the timeline, so I won't bother trying to remember them and get it wrong. But that was at about 7:16:11, roughly. And the call between Rachel Gentile and Trayvon Martin ended about 7:15:43. So it's around 30 seconds from when the call ended. Of course, Mr. Zimmerman is not on the phone at this point. Mr. Martin and Ms. Gentile are. And then the call from the resident, having heard the commotion. Here, I'm sorry if I didn't say that before. Let me show you. Okay. This is the T again, right here, and here. Now we are over here. This is the T. The angle is a bit bad, so it looks like this house obscures it. It doesn't. There's an equal distance through here, and we can show you that. So this is the person who lives right here who calls 911 after hearing the commotion that starts right here. And best guess, 20 to 30 seconds after the commotion started that caught Ms. Lauer and her husband, Jeremy Weinberg's attention. And by the time they got the phone figured out and working, got connected with 911, about 30 seconds roughly had passed. And then that's the call that you'll hear the rest of. Now, you'll hear the screams in the background. You'll hear the shot. We'll play that here, too. And you'll hear, of course, Ms. Lauer talking to Sean Nofke. I'm sorry, not Sean Nofke. He was the dispatcher speaking with Mr. Zimmerman. I don't know who Ms. Lauer was talking with on her call. Again, this is the clubhouse, the pool, and you'll hear testimony that George Zimmerman's truck, this silver Honda Ridgeline, was parked right about here. It was seen later that night after the shooting by another retreat at Twin Lakes resident and neighbor of Mr. Zimmerman, a woman by the name of Eloise Dilligard. She saw his truck and said, that's George's truck. I'll ask him what's going on. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is just another view. If you see them side by side, this is the T. There's a little doggy disposal station here. Jonathan Manalo lives on the end. Jenna Lauer and Jeremy Weinberg live here. And right next to them is John Good. He was the eyewitness. He's really the only resident that actually saw much of anything close in time to the shot. And he got a good look. He made a diagram, in fact, of what he saw that night. I'll show you that. He gave a clear description of what he saw, and we'll talk more about that later. So, before I'm done today, I also want to spend some time talking with you about the forensic evidence that's directly connected with the shooting. But before we do that as well, let's listen to the non-emergency call that Mr. Zimmerman made. What I'd like to do is play it from beginning to end without anything else. And then I will like to point to certain parts of it I would ask you to listen to when it comes into evidence and make note of. So it's only, 4 minutes long. Mr. Pinella, if you would help me with that.
Police Department line stand report the shots.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. It's Retrieview Circle. The best address I can give you is 111 Retrieview Circle. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
Yeah, a dark hoodie, like a gray hoodie, and either jeans or sweatpants and white tennis shoes. He's here now. He was just staring.
Oh, he's just walking around the area.
At all the houses.
Okay.
And now he's just staring at me.
Okay, and so it's 1111 retrieve you or 111?
That's the clubhouse.
That's the clubhouse. Do you know what he's near the clubhouse right now?
Yeah, now he's coming towards me.
Okay.
He's got his hand in his waistband. And he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he
He's
looks?
got a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Late teens, okay.
Something's wrong with him. Yeah. He's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if he does
Get an
anything,
officer
okay?
over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
When you come to the clubhouse, you come straight in and make a left. Actually, you would go past the clubhouse.
Okay, it says on the left-hand side from the clubhouse?
No, you go in straight through the entrance, and then you make a left.
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
All right, sir, what is your name?
George. He ran.
All right, George, what's your last name?
Zimmerman.
And George, what's the phone number you're calling from?
407-435-2400.
All right, George, we do have him on the way. Do you want to meet with the officer when they get out there?
Yeah.
All right, where are you going to meet with them at?
If they come in through the gate, tell them to go straight past the clubhouse and make a left. And then they go past the mailboxes. You'll see my truck.
Okay, what address are you parked in front of?
I don't know. It's a cut through, so I don't know the address.
Okay, do you live in the area?
Yeah.
Well, what's your apartment number?
It's a home. It's 1950. Oh, crap. I don't want to give it out loud. I don't know where this kid is.
Okay, do you want to just meet with them right near the mailboxes, then?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, George, I'll let him know to meet you with you out there. Okay?
Actually, could you have him call me and I'll tell him where I'm at?
Okay, yeah, that's no problem.
You need my number? You got it.
Yeah, I got it. It's 407-435-2400.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, no problem. I'll let them know to call you when they're in the area.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
One thing that I failed to mention, and I'll just, before we go back through the actual timeline, is I showed you where George Zimmerman lived. Here we are. Clubhouse, pool, T. And that Trayvon Martin was staying in the neighborhood with his father's girlfriend. Her name's Brandy Green. She has a 12-year-old son, Chad Johnson, I believe. That Trayvon Martin was sort of hanging out with. There were no adults home in that night. It was only 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and it was the All-Star game. That before that had gotten underway. So, but that's down here. in this area. Just to kind of, okay. If we could go back then to the beginning of the call, and let's take a look at the times. I'm sorry, let's, at the very top. The very top of the display. Can you go back to the beginning? You know, I think if you take the button on the bottom and just pull it all the way to the left, you'll get to the front. Yeah, there we go. Now, let's take a look at the times. Stay on that one. Okay, stay. There might be a second or two, depending on where the record came from, but within a second or two of each end, this is George Zimmerman's call to the police. The non-emergency call timeline was connected after he had seen Trayvon Martin at 7:09:34. That's the call with Sean Nofke. And that call disconnected at 7:13:40. All right, next. I'm looking for the beginning of the call. Yes, right there. This is the sort of the parallel calls connected here. You see that while there had been lots of other calls and a ton of text and all sorts of things that day, the second to last call between Rachel Gentile and Trayvon Martin started at 6:54:16. So that was well before George Zimmerman called the police. And then it ended at 7:11:47. That's what I said a moment ago. We'll tie it up at the end. About 20 seconds later, they reconnected. I submit that 20 seconds won't turn out to matter very much because you'll soon learn that George Zimmerman was on the phone during that entire time with the police. Okay, so let's walk through it just a little bit more. Next. So George Zimmerman says to Sean Nofke, he's just staring at me. Mr. Nofke asks, is near the clubhouse for now? And Mr. Zimmerman says, yeah, now he's coming towards me. What that's all about is this. George Zimmerman saw Trayvon Martin over in this area as he was coming around here to go out to Target. He pulled over to make the call in the vicinity of the clubhouse. So when this part of the conversation is taking place, Mr. Zimmerman is sitting here on the phone with the police. So they're talking about the clubhouse. Next. The dispatcher, after hearing what George Zimmerman said, okay, just let me know if he does anything else. And George Zimmerman says, get an officer over here. Please get an officer. The little discussion was, do you want somebody? Yes. Please get an officer over here. Directly asking the dispatcher to please send a police officer to the neighborhood. And then it's repeated by the dispatcher, just let me know if this guy does anything else. 7 or 8 seconds later, George Zimmerman laments, if you will. He's been involved in the community for a while. He's made other calls. In fact, his role as the liaison with Neighborhood Watch was that there's one point person with Wendy Dorval. So instead of all of the residents calling her with any issues, Mr. Zimmerman coordinated that. So residents would ask him to phone in something or to report something. So he was familiar with what was going on in the community, not just from his own experience, but from having been involved as the coordinator liaison. In fact, there was an attempted break-in just a couple of weeks before, right around this area. Right around this area. Zimmerman's still in the car. By that time, though, he has moved. Was he following Trayvon Martin? Yes, he was following Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin continued to walk this way or jog this way. In any event, he kept moving this way. And George Zimmerman did too. He was following him at a distance and reporting what he was seeing to the police and describing what was happening. So when the dispatcher Nafke said, "Let me know if he does anything else," George Zimmerman was doing that. He was following him in the car and got up to about here. That's where the car was. He's running. Which way is he running? Suggesting that he would like Mr. Zimmerman, submit, to tell him which way he's running. But it's a cut through. You can't drive in that direction. You can only see which way he's running if you get out of the vehicle to see where he went. So, George Zimmerman at 7:11:43, you can hear this, we'll play it again so you can listen for it, unbuckles his seatbelt and opens the car door. You can hear the chime, and you'll hear the door shut at 7:11:48. Okay. I didn't write it down. Maybe one of you did. I seem to remember that the call ended between Trayvon Martin and Rachel Gentile right about that time. 7:11:47, something like that. Yeah, 7:11:47. All right, so at this point, when George Zimmerman opens the car door, gets out of the car, that call had just ended. They had been losing calls on and off all day. That wasn't a surprise to anybody. One called the other called back. There's no reason ascribed to this by Ms. Gentile other than they'd been having trouble with the system. So the call ends. And then at 11:48, right there, that's when Mr. Zimmerman gets out of the truck. And the dispatcher says, which entrance is that? He's headed towards the back entrance. You will start to hear some noise, I think the evidence will show you, in the background that suggests that Mr. Zimmerman is out of the vehicle. Whether it's breath noises, wind noises, how fast Mr. Zimmerman was moving, no suggestion that he was actually running. But you can hear more noise going on, and it's evident from the recording that he's out of the vehicle. So, at him, he'd approached him, he had his hand in his waistband, and then he took off. Right then, Sean Nafke, the dispatcher, figures out more of what's going on. He realizes, probably due to some of the additional noise, that it seems like Mr. Zimmerman is out of the vehicle and says, "Are you following him?" And George Zimmerman doesn't say no. He says, "Yeah, I am following him." And what he had done by then is he had gotten out of the vehicle and had gone in this direction. So he's coming right down here when you're hearing the noise and when you're hearing the discussion about which way is he running. And then he's up around here. To me, it's not clear from the evidence. Pay attention to it if you would. There's a woman up here, her name is Jane Serdyka, that saw parts of this at different points in time. She said she thought she heard a voice or maybe voices a minute or 2, 3, she's not clear on the time, before the exchange that turned into the event. It might have been George Zimmerman talking on the phone with the dispatcher. There's no way to know that for sure, but it would be somewhat consistent, I would think. We'll need to hear what she says exactly to know if that's possible. If it isn't, then it could have been someone else, perhaps. This was the dog path. This is where people would take their dogs and walk them, and the disposal station is here. So, in any event, George Zimmerman is coming along here talking with the dispatcher, and Sean Nofke says, "Are you following him?" George Zimmerman says, "Yes." And Sean Nofke says, "We don't need you to do that." George Zimmerman says, "Okay." Suggesting, I suppose, you don't need to do anything more to tell us which way he went, where he went, or even if he's doing anything else. So George stopped. George Zimmerman stopped. This is the pickup on the call between witness A. That's Rachel Gentile. As you may know, there's been some anonymity issues throughout the case. There aren't now, except for the jury, of course. So if you see something in the trial that's marked with a witness number, we'll try to remember to tell you who they are so you can keep all that straight. It would be unreasonable to ask you to keep all the witness numbers straight. So that's Rachel Gentile. She's 19 now. She was 18 at the time in February of 2012. And she came into this case mid to late March, about 3 weeks after the event. And a little later I'll explain to you how that happened, what the circumstances were, and ask you to consider certain things in evaluating her testimony. So at this point, it's routine for Sean Nofke. He asks George Zimmerman, "What's your name?" "George." And George repeats, "He ran." This is a statement made by the dispatcher to Mr. Zimmerman, keeping in mind the police are on their way. Mr. Zimmerman asked a few moments ago to please send an officer, and Mr. Nofke assured that they had. And Mr. Nofke says to Mr. Zimmerman, for sort of orientation purposes, "What address are you parked in front of?" Then there was a little confusion because he was parked over here, but there aren't any street signs right here. So unless you actually have memorized the name of the street, you can know where you are. I think we've all done that. We know exactly where we are, but we don't happen to be able to know the name of the street. There's a question whether this is, in fact, I don't know if it's Twin Trees or Twin Lakes. It's one or the other. But this is Retreat View Circle. And it goes all the way around. In fact, George Zimmerman lives on Retreat View Circle down here. So there was some confusion about what address So Mr. Nofke got to the heart of it and said, "Do you live in the area?" Mr. Zimmerman, "Yeah." "Okay, what's your apartment number?" Orienting. So, next. It's a home, meaning a townhome. These are all townhomes, similar design. And then Mr. Zimmerman realizes he just gave, or was about to give, his address out loud. And stops and catches himself because he does not know where Trayvon Martin is. He ran, he lost him, he can't provide any information to the police, which well, you'll see the evidence proves at least one thing. Trayvon Martin hadn't gone home. We know that. We also know it was almost pitch black out. Mr. Guy pointed that out. This was a picture taken by one of the investigators for the medical examiners group when they got there. The police had already cordoned off the area, but the line, the tape up that you see. Taking a picture with a flash. Right here. That's with the flash. I won't. You can see the building on the corner. You can see some stuff in here. The only point now is it was really, really dark. Now, this was later, admittedly, and we were still talking only 7 in the afternoon, evening in February, but all of the witnesses agreed it was dark. It had been raining all day. It was just plain dark. Sun goes down, 4:30, something like that in the winter. So George Zimmerman says, "I don't know where this kid is. I don't want to give my address out loud." Next. Some more conversation. Well, where do you want to meet the officers? You want to meet them at the mailboxes. Mr. Zimmerman says, "Okay." And then he says, "Well, you have my number, right? This is the era of cell phones. We are immediately in contact. So instead of meeting at a specific location, keeping in mind the mailboxes are over here. Mr. Zimmerman's truck is here. Mr. Zimmerman says, just have him call me. You got my number, and I'll tell you where I am." If you don't mind, let's just play it through one more time. It's only 4 minutes, and we'll be done with this part.
Sanford Police Department, line is being recorded. Sean?
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. It's Retrieview Circle. The best address I can give you is 111 Retrieview Circle. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
Yeah, a dark hoodie, like a gray hoodie, and either jeans or sweatpants and white tennis shoes. He's here now. He was just staring.
Oh, he's just walking around the area?
At all the houses.
Okay.
And now he's just staring at me.
Okay, it's 1111 Retrieview or 111?
That's the clubhouse.
That's the clubhouse. Do you know he's near the clubhouse right now?
Yeah, now he's coming towards me.
Okay.
He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he
He's
looks?
got a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Late teens, okay.
Mm-hmm. Something's wrong with him. Yeah. He's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if he does
Get an
anything,
officer
okay?
over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
When you come to the clubhouse, you come straight in and make a left. Actually, you would go past the clubhouse.
Okay, he said on the left-hand side from the clubhouse?
No, you go in straight through the entrance, and then you make a left. Other entrance of the neighborhood?
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
All right, sir, what is your name?
George. He ran.
All right, George, what's your last name?
Zimmerman.
And George, what's the phone number you're calling from?
407-435-2400.
All right, George, we do have him on the way. Do you want to meet with the officer when they get out there?
Yeah.
All right, where are you going to meet with them at?
If they come in through the gate, tell them to go straight past the clubhouse and straight past the clubhouse and make a left. And then they go past the mailboxes. You'll see my truck.
Okay, what address are you parked in front of?
I don't know. It's a cut through, so I don't know the address.
Okay, do you live in the area?
Yeah.
What's your apartment number?
It's a home. It's 1950. Oh, crap. I don't want to give it out loud. I don't know where this kid is.
Okay, do you want to just meet with them right near the mailboxes, then?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, George, I'll let him know to meet you with you out there, okay?
Actually, could you have him call me and I'll tell him where I'm at?
Okay, yeah, that's no problem.
You need my number? You got it?
Yeah, I got it. It's 407-435-2400.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, no problem. I'll let them know to call you when they're in the area.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, 7:13:40, the call ends. Keeping in mind that by this time, Trayvon Martin was back on the phone with Rachel Gentile and stays on the phone for the next couple of minutes. So, you'll hear more about Ms. Gentile and what she heard, but I think more importantly, perhaps, what she didn't hear if George Zimmerman was actively pursuing, chasing, with the intent to confront and murder Trayvon Martin. Second-degree murder requires an act reckless, indifferent to human life, a depraved mind act, ill will, hatred, spite. What Rachel Gentile will tell you in her conversation with Trayvon Martin, at the moment that this actually became physical, was that Trayvon Martin, I'll use my words, that Trayvon Martin decided to confront George Zimmerman. That instead of going home, he had plenty of time. He had, this is what, 60, 70 yards? Plenty of time. Could have gone back and forth 4 or 5 times if he wanted to. But choosing not to do that, he either left and went back or just hid in the darkness to see about this guy that he thought was following him. And turned to George Zimmerman out of the darkness and said, "Why are you following me?" Or something to that effect. And we know that was pretty close in time to the end of this call. Pretty close. We don't know exactly when. But if you accept what Rachel Gentile says she heard, whether it's accurate or not, whether it was exactly the words, "Why you following me for?" or something to that effect, that's basically the last thing she heard. There'll be some other things we'll talk about, but that was when Trayvon Martin made the decision to confront George Zimmerman and say, "What are you following me for?" So how does that fit together? I'll show you. Thank you. The T, keep that in mind, the T up here. This is a slide, I guess you'd call it, or a diagram, just for orientation. This is the T. There's the dog thing. As I said before, we were using witness numbers rather than names. And what this shows you is a slide that positions the evidence that was marked, identified, and collected by law enforcement after the shooting. Let's talk about a little of that first. No, let's do this. This is where Jenna Lauer and Jeremy Weinberg lived. Jenna Lauer is the one who made the call when she heard the commotion out here in the neighborhood, in the vicinity of the T. She describes what she heard as some loud voices. She called it a sort of three-part exchange, like an accusatory or confrontation voice, a response, and another one, a three-part exchange. Heard that off to their left. They were watching TV out here. This is screened. And behind it is the sliding glass door that was open. However, they couldn't see anything because they had these little bamboo slatted blinds that were down. So they couldn't see it, but they knew something was happening. Enough that it got their attention, they decided to call the police. With this three-part exchange, they started to hear what they thought maybe was scuffling feet on grass, and then they started hearing someone moaning or crying for help. They dialed the phone. I'm trying to remember. I think they tried a phone and it wasn't on, or they couldn't get it to work, so they tried the other one. But within just a few seconds, they got through. Keeping in mind that I think the call was connected at 7:16:11, something like 30 seconds after the call with Trayvon Martin and Rachel Gentile ended. So we're only talking about 30 seconds, including the time it takes to dial the phone, get the phone, dial the phone, figure out, hey, there's something going on here, make the call, connect the call, and you'll hear the operator here in a second. You've all heard those anyway. There's operators. So, hearing the exchange, the voices, hearing what they thought was something going on, they called the police. They called emergency services. And here's what they heard. Here's the call. This is the call with the screams. This is the call with the shot, to keep in mind. The shot occurs about 40, maybe 45 seconds into this recording. There is a sound, though, that precedes the shot by a few seconds that on first listening sounds like it could be a shot. It's not. There's no mistake, no dispute in this case that George Zimmerman fired one and only one shot. That is proven by forensic evidence. I'll digress for just a moment. The reason we know that, not like he fired once and missed, not like he shot 2 times, as you might think if you hear this. Mr. Guy gave you the answer. Any of you that are familiar with firearms know that you can put an additional round in the gun after the magazine itself is full, simply by putting one into the chamber and then putting another one into the magazine. So if the magazine holds 7, you can actually put 8 rounds in the gun. It's clear that's what happened in this case because the police found 1 shell casing and the magazine still was filled to capacity. So there was only 1 shot, no matter how you look at it. We'll talk more about the gun here in a little bit, too. Let's get on with the call. Mr. Pinello, would you help me with that, please?
911, do you need police, fire, medical?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay, what's the address that they're near? Is this in the Twin Lake Homes in Sanford?
Yes.
Okay, and is it a male or female?
It sounds like a male.
Okay, and you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
Okay. Does he look hurt to you?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending him.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your phone number?
Just there's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
How many?
There's 1. Get down. No, come here.
Is he no longer yelling?
No one, I don't know. Get in here now. Get up here.
All right, is he right outside?
Yeah, pretty much out the back, yeah.
Is he in front of it or behind that address?
He's behind my house.
Okay.
Just stay away from the windows.
I don't hear him yelling anymore. Do you hear anything?
I'm going to stop it there, only because obviously the screaming is over, the shot has been fired, and this is a discussion. You'll have the opportunity to hear the whole thing as many times as you want, and I hope that you do. I hope that you listen to it 1, 5, 10, 50 times if you need to. The same thing with the non-emergency call. You'll have it in evidence. You can listen to it as many times as you want. But what we know, obviously, everyone agrees to this. All of the witnesses, whether they agree to anything else, they all agree those are the screams of someone in a life-threatening situation. Someone screaming repeatedly over and over and over for help, needing desperately for someone to come to their assistance. It wasn't, that's the only recording of any that shows what it shows. There were some other 911 calls. That's the only recording that I can think of that actually has these events on it. It's certainly the best quality, and it's not that great. Why? Because it was recorded on a cell phone in Jenna Lauer's hand inside her unit 20 or 30 or 40 feet away from where the sounds were being made. Cell phone technology isn't designed to capture the full range of sounds. It's designed for people to be able to hear what the other person is saying and to have lots of those conversations going on at the same time. So it has some acoustic challenges, if you will. It may not contain all of the screams, for example. It certainly wouldn't contain anything that's not that loud. But it is what it is. So what happened then, this is a quiet Sunday night. It's raining. Quite a few people are home. Other people also hear something going on. This woman up here, her name is Jane Serdyka, heard the voices. She saw some of the scuffle. And she believes that she saw Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman at the time of the shot. But she's wrong about that. You'll find, I think, in this case that there are well-meaning and honest people that, based upon limited information or preconceived notions or biases, mean well but just somehow get it wrong. I'll tell you why for just a second, then we'll go on. The reason she got it wrong is that she saw what she thinks was George Zimmerman on top of Trayvon Martin at the time the shot was fired. And that Trayvon Martin was on his stomach, that he was face down. That couldn't happen. That could not have happened in this case. We're going to talk about some forensic evidence here in a bit, but we know that couldn't happen. So she could not have seen the moment where Trayvon Martin is shot. Why? It's really pretty simple, because Trayvon Martin was shot in the chest, not in the back. So if Trayvon Martin was lying face down when she saw George Zimmerman on top of him, then she didn't see it. She saw it later. Only a few seconds later, as other people in the neighborhood will describe something similar, but it was after. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if you're following what I mean. I'm not trying to jump ahead too much, but people heard some screaming around. They've described it different ways. Some heard only a couple. Some heard more than that. Some thinks they saw or heard a fight of some sort with in various positions, up or down, flailing, or what have you. But except for Jane Serdyka, who I just explained how, and you'll hear her testimony, got it wrong when piecing all of this together in her own mind. She didn't see a muzzle blast. She saw Trayvon Martin face down. She saw George Zimmerman on top. And there was that moment. There's no question that there was that moment when Trayvon Martin was shot. He fell forward face down. George Zimmerman was underneath him, and within a few seconds, 2, 3, 4 seconds, basically switched positions. And when you hear the shot and you figure out what that's all about, and you go outside to look, if it takes you 2, 3, or 4 seconds, that's the image that you see. That's what you see. George Zimmerman on top of Trayvon Martin with his hands pressed down on him. 2 or 3 people saw that. And they did see it. They're right. It's just that it was after the shot. There is someone, though, who actually saw Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman together before the shot. Just moments before the shot. You could probably piece it together, 10, 15 seconds maybe before the shot. The reason you can piece it together is he also called 911. So you can connect up some of the dots. You can figure out when the shot took place. You can figure out when the calls were made, and then roughly figure out when in this sequence he saw what he saw. I'll leave that to you, but I'm going to suggest it's probably 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. But here's what he saw, and here's who he is. His name is John Good, and he lives right here. He lives next door to Jenna Lauer and Jeremy Weinberg, right next door. He heard the noise. He heard the screaming, the cries for help, and he went to investigate. He doesn't have the screened-in porch. He has the sliding glass door. So he goes out the sliding glass door, and he's right here on the patio, his patio. From here to here, I don't know, 15 feet, 20 feet maybe, right in front of him. Me to you. And here's what he sees. Now, he doesn't know who it is at this point. He doesn't recognize anybody. He didn't see faces. But he could clearly see colors. And there was no mistake the color of the clothing of the people that he was seeing. He was very clear. There was one of the participants, if you will, one of the people involved, was wearing a dark shirt. Black almost, especially because it was so wet. That was Trayvon Martin. He had a charcoal-colored, hooded sweatshirt. On the other hand, George Zimmerman had a red-colored jacket. Very different. No mistaking the two. At first, John Good wasn't quite sure what he was hearing or even what he was seeing. He thought it might have been a dog attack or something. He wasn't even quite sure it was two people. And he got outside, and then he saw it was two people. And he saw them moving a bit up towards the sidewalk. He saw a person that he described as the one with the black top mounted on the person with the red shirt. Mounted is a term used in mixed martial arts, fighting. Some of you know more about that than I do, no doubt. Mounted is when you straddle the person around their hips. They are pinned underneath you. They are essentially helpless. He saw Trayvon Martin with the dark-colored shirt mounted on George Zimmerman. He saw George Zimmerman in the red-colored shirt on his back. He described what he saw in the same terms of this mixed martial arts vernacular. He called it a ground and pound. A ground and pound. That's the words that he used. A ground and pound is when you're mounted on somebody, they are helpless, and you are basically beating them senseless. He may have seen some of this, he may have seen some of that. It's dark, and he didn't get a long look, but he saw enough to know this was serious. What did he do? He yelled at them, "Stop it," or "Cut it out," or something like that. I don't think you can hear that on the recording. I think that gives you an example of what you can hear on the recording and what you can't. John Good will tell you he yelled something at them, probably "Stop it" or "Cut it out." And you know what happened at that point? Nothing. Except two things. George Zimmerman cried out for help, looked at him, looked at John Good, and said, "Help me, help me." And Trayvon Martin kept on hitting. So John Good did this. He went back inside to call 911. The right thing to do, perhaps, the smart thing to do, no doubt. But George Zimmerman was crying out for help, and no one helped. And it continued. It continued until you hear the shot. You can hear the cries for help up until the moment of the shot. And then there's no more cries for help. Why would there be? So, there was enough commotion, enough people heard these yells, that they started coming out to check it out. But after the shot, right after the shot, though, from their doorway, a couple of people looked right outside and saw this. They saw Trayvon Martin face down and George Zimmerman on top of him, kind of holding his back or his arms or something like that. One of them may have even yelled at him, and he kind of turned at one point. One of them saw Trayvon Martin's leg move, they think. Nobody heard any more sounds, though. My guess is that the silence was deafening at that point. George Zimmerman struggled to his feet. He was out of breath. He was injured. According to Jonathan Manalo, that's the guy on the corner. Right here. Oh, this is kind of weird. It's right here. This is a shadow or something because of the angle. Jonathan Manalo lives on the corner. This is the T. This is where John Good lives. This is where Trayvon Martin's body was, right in front of John Good's house. Jonathan Manalo comes out. He hears the commotion. His wife hears the commotion, actually. He says, well, just leave him alone. Don't get involved. Then they hear the shot, and he comes running, if you will. He comes out with a flashlight. He is here within seconds. And what does he see? What he sees is George Zimmerman as I'm staggering. George Zimmerman says to him, am I bleeding? Jonathan Manalo says, yes. Yes, you are. In fact, for no reason other than what he was seeing, he took a picture of George Zimmerman's head with his cell phone. This is within seconds of the shot. This is the back of George Zimmerman's head. Here's the red, orangish jacket. I think that's probably the sidewalk. Jonathan Manalo had a flashlight and a cell phone. He took this picture. He took a couple of other pictures, too, that will show you in evidence that actually show Trayvon Martin's body there in the position that it was immediately after he was shot. I won't show you those now. You'll see them in evidence. You'll see exactly where they are. You'll see the position. One witness described it as if he were riding a bike. I suggest that it's because he was straddling George Zimmerman when George Zimmerman shot him. And when he fell forward, and his legs were still in that same position. As George Zimmerman scrambled up to get out from under him, he stayed right like that. So what happens then, Jonathan Manalo is there. He takes this picture, and he says, what happened? George Zimmerman says, he was beating me up, and I shot him. George Zimmerman wanted Jonathan Manalo to call his wife, George's wife, Shelley, which he did. Jonathan Manalo, as Mr. Guy pointed out, said something that sounds a bit odd, so let's talk about it a minute. He described George Zimmerman, first of all, as breathing hard, having just gotten his butt beat, staggering, and then, though somehow calm, as if nothing had happened. I submit that what the evidence will show is that George Zimmerman had just experienced the most traumatic event of his life. He probably didn't know what state he was in, literally what state he was in, much less his emotional state at that moment being particularly significant to suggest that if he acted like he was calm, he didn't care, as if he was acting out of ill will, spite, evil intent, disregard for human life. That's what murder is in this case. That's what the state has to prove, that that's what George Zimmerman did and acted that way. And on that, Jonathan Manalo saying, wow, it struck me he was calm. I submit it maybe flat, affect, something. But a guy who's staggering and bleeding, who just got his butt beat, who it's obvious had been crying for help for 40 seconds before he took that action to save his own life, is not going to be calm. We know he was injured more than just this. Jonathan Manalo saw injuries on his face. Tim Smith is the police officer with Sanford who showed up first. Keep in mind that George Zimmerman asked that a police officer be sent to the scene. And Sean Nofke said, okay, they're on their way. And they were. They got there very soon after the shot, moments after Jonathan Manalo was there with George Zimmerman. And Officer Smith said, who shot him? George said, I did. George Zimmerman. Following police protocol, Officer Smith handcuffed George Zimmerman. They call that for officer safety. Makes a lot of sense to me. There's a guy with a gun, someone dead. You'd want to take the guy who said, I shot him, and cuff him, which he did. No resistance, no complaining, no explanation by George necessary. He just cuffed him, took his gun. The gun was in a holster on the right side. I had a Somebody keeps moving my stuff. Sorry. I'll describe it for you. It was a little inside the waistband holster. So here's the holster. No big deal. It fits inside the waistband like this. Here's a picture of the holster itself that was in evidence. Here's a picture of the gun. As Mr. Guy said, it's a Kel-Tec 9mm semi-automatic, double action only handgun. That's important in the sense that it doesn't have an external hammer. You can't cock it and then pull the trigger. Double action, you pull the trigger, the hammer goes back and then forward. It has an extra strong trigger pull as a result of that. It's designed to be carried loaded, and in that position. It doesn't have an external safety, if you will. The way George Zimmerman was carrying the gun was the way it was supposed to be carried. We'll talk more about the gun in a minute. But, in fact, the training that George Zimmerman got from his friend, the Federal Air Marshal, was exactly what George Zimmerman did. It was the kind of gun that was recommended to George Zimmerman, the double action only, round in the chamber. It's safe as long as you're responsible. We'll talk about gun responsibility too before we're all done. However, Tim Smith, the Sanford Police Department, takes George into custody. He gets the gun, the holster. This is the magazine that had the bullets in it. And takes him over to the patrol car while they sort things out. Smith is over off of, well, you know it by now, off of Retreat View Circle on that big street that goes around. He's parked over there, and George Zimmerman is placed in the back of the patrol car, handcuffed. Additional officers arrive. The crime scene is taped off. Residents start coming out, trying to figure out what's going on. That's when Eloise Dilligard, the neighbor of Mr. Zimmerman's, drives up there and sees his truck, knows there's something going on, and says to herself, well, I'll just ask George. So in the meantime, George Zimmerman's in the back of the patrol car, and Ms. Lauer is asked to identify him. Can you identify anybody? And she doesn't want to go see this person that just shot someone. So she says, take a picture. That's to Mike Wagner. Mike Wagner's on the scene. He's with the Sanford Police Department. It's too early. Crime scene isn't there yet. They don't have all their equipment. They're just starting to get a handle on this. So Officer Mike Wagner takes a cell phone and takes a picture of Trayvon Martin's face. By then, other officers had turned Mr. Martin's body over. CPR was started. Tragically, there was nothing that could be done. Indeed, the shot did penetrate the heart, the right ventricle, massive bleeding, death, loss of consciousness very soon, death not too long thereafter. So Wagner took a picture of Trayvon Martin's face, and then he went over and took a picture of George Zimmerman's face, not to document his injuries, but so he could show the picture to residents, any other witnesses that might be there, to say, do you know who this guy is? Nobody knew who Trayvon Martin was. They wouldn't have had this picture at this point. They would have had no identification. There was no identification on Mr. Martin. He had a cell phone there, which they couldn't get to work. And there was nobody there that knew who he was, keeping in mind that Mr. Martin and Ms. Green were not home that night. Ms. Green's son, Chad, was, but he was headphones, video games. He didn't even know anything had happened. They were way down there, on the map. Way down. He lived down here. Didn't even know this was going on. So no one was able to identify who Trayvon Martin was, but not for lack of trying by the police. So this is Trayvon Martin, by the way, at the 7-Eleven. This is where he went to get the candy, the Skittles, for his the friend Chad, and the Arizona brand fruit drink. It was a 23-ounce can full. That's important to remember, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes, why that's important. So this is the person that George Zimmerman saw when he called the police to say, there's someone in the neighborhood, I don't know who he is. Of course, Trayvon Martin is wearing the hoodie in the store. This guy right here, his name is Andrew Gaw. He doesn't remember this event, but he's 5'10". He told us that under oath. He's 5'10". Trayvon Martin is 5'11", as measured by the medical examiner. He had shoes on, and he had a hooded sweatshirt on, which makes him well over 6 feet tall, as you can see. We know that he weighed 158 pounds. He wasn't skinny. 158 pounds at 5'11" is right in the middle. But so Mike Wagner takes this picture of George Zimmerman to show Jenna Lauer and anybody else, to tell them, who is this guy? Jenna Lauer says, looked at it, I don't know. Didn't know him immediately. And then Eloise Dilligard, by then was there, said, that's George. That's George. Ms. Lauer, who knew George from the neighborhood, didn't recognize him because of all the injuries. Ms. Dilligard, who lived right near him, did. This is the picture taken from Mike Wagner's cell phone that was shown to Jenna Lauer and provided to us in evidence. This is the second picture taken of George Zimmerman that night. That's the first, by Jonathan Manalo. And here's the second. This is taken while George Zimmerman's in the back of the patrol car while the police sort this out. Again, you'll have the opportunity in evidence to examine it carefully and closely. But let me point out a couple of things. The abrasion to the side of the nose, marks and abrasions on the forehead, the swollen and seemingly deviated nose at that point, suggesting that George Zimmerman took quite a wallop squarely in the face. And, of course, the blood. It's still glistening. It's still glistening. George Zimmerman cooperated fully. We went to the police department that night. He answered all their questions as many times as they wanted, as many days as they wanted. He had just taken tremendous blows to his face, tremendous blows to his head. But he didn't ask for a lawyer. This is such an incredible case that the man who shot and killed Trayvon Martin is fully cooperative, doesn't ask for a lawyer day after day, takes any test is offered, answers any questions, goes back as many times as they ask, never asks for a lawyer. Yet it seems as though about half the witnesses in the case have lawyered up. Remarkable. Never seen anything like that. So George Zimmerman stays at the Sanford Police Department that night in custody for several hours. During that time, he's interviewed. I submit to you it was unfortunate. Well, I'll back up. The paramedics, of course, came to the scene, and as soon as they attended to Trayvon Martin, they then attended to George Zimmerman. They cleaned him up, if you will. They needed to see what injuries he had. He was covered in blood. So they used peroxide and what they do to clean it up. They saw the lacerations on the back of his head. They saw the nose and the blood. And they talked to Mr. Zimmerman. He seemed pretty well oriented. Mike Brandy is the paramedic that was there, who suggested to law enforcement, after all, Mr. Zimmerman's in custody. He doesn't get to make decisions at this point. Mike Brandy, the paramedic who examined Mr. Zimmerman, said, I think he should go to the hospital. You know, he's had head trauma. He's obviously injured. And the police said, well, we'll deal with it. You don't need to transport him. We'll take care of it. It didn't happen. I'm not complaining about that particularly, because pretty soon thereafter, Mr. Zimmerman was taken to the police department. There's video that shows him in the Sally Port, they call it. That's where you come in a secure area, get out, go upstairs. There's video everywhere. You can see him. Can't see much on his head at that point, although you can on close inspection, because he'd been cleaned up by the paramedics. He goes upstairs. In the meantime, Diana Smith, who is the crime scene person, is at the crime scene. She's doing all this stuff. She's marking all the evidence, taking it into account. Pretty soon the medical examiner's investigator shows up. So she's busy. So Mr. Zimmerman's at the Sanford Police Department for several hours. And during that time, he washes up, if you will. He gets rid of the blood on his face that the paramedics had missed, and he just is there. His clothes are taken for processing. His wife is allowed to bring another change of clothes for him. And he sits and he talks. He'll answer any questions. Doris Singleton is the investigator that was with George Zimmerman at the Sanford Police Department that night. The lead detective is investigator Chris Serino. He was at the scene. He was interviewing residents. He was watching what was happening with the evidence collection. They were doing a canvass. They did several of those, actually, to see who had seen what, if anything, and taking witness statements. One of the witness statements that was taken was John Good. Remember him? He was the eyewitness. And he drew a sketch of what he had seen right out his door. So this is what the police knew already that night, while Mr. Zimmerman is up in the Sanford Police Department. Mr. Good's house, there's like 2 sketches here built into one. In fact, he numbered them. So he sees the sidewalk, red top, bottom, black top, on top. Trayvon Martin had the black shirt. George Zimmerman had the red one. Again, now they're up towards the sidewalk. Again, he knows it's serious now. Red shirt, bottom, black shirt, top. So George Zimmerman is at the Sanford Police Department in custody, being interviewed, waiting for something to happen. And it's midnight or later, several hours later. Diana Smith is doing the crime scene work. That's represented here. We'll talk about that in a minute. I believe her name is Tara Malfers, is the investigator with the medical examiner. The medical examiner in this case was from Volusia County. His name is Shipping Bao, B-A-O. He's the pathologist who performed the autopsy. When Mr. Martin's body was transported, they did not yet know who he was. So the body was sent to the medical examiner's office. It was in the blue body bag that we've all seen. It was marked with the identifier of the case number, and the autopsy was done the next day. Tara Malfers is on the scene, and she takes pictures too. In addition to Diana Smith from Sanford, Ms. Malfers takes, she may have a different name, a different married name now, but we'll know who she is. Tara Malfers takes pictures and is involved in the livery aspect of it. In the meantime, George Zimmerman's at the Sanford Police Department. Around midnight or so, Diana Smith is done at the scene. Evidence has been marked and collected. It will be then submitted to the lab for processing of all sorts of processing. That's the forensic evidence part of this. And she goes to the Sanford Police Department. She takes pictures of the gun, showed you those, and she takes lots of pictures, I think it was 30 or so, of George Zimmerman. By then he'd been all cleaned up and several hours had passed, So it's not nearly, of course, as dramatic as these, but you can clearly see the cuts in the back of the head. You can see more of the sort of abrasion, what do they call it? Punctate abrasions, for those of you with some medical background, on his scalp. But what you can really see in these pictures that you'll have in evidence are the lumps, the big knots on each side of his head, consistent with having his head slammed into concrete. What's slammed? Well, obviously you can take someone's head and hit it so hard once that they could lose consciousness or die, could fracture their skull. Or through resistance or something else, you might not be as successful as you want to be, but you still have impact, and it's evident that George Zimmerman's head impacted a hard surface like concrete. Indeed, the state's consulting expert agrees that his injuries, the lumps on his head, are consistent with his head having impacted concrete. We have a medical examiner. He's an eminent, distinguished pathologist. His name is Vincent DeMaio from Texas. He's the expert on gunshot deaths. But he's also a qualified pathologist in trauma, and he'll tell you the same thing. Yeah. He had his head banged pretty hard on cement. That shakes things up. It affects thinking. It can lead to concussion or, of course, depending on how significant the trauma, death. But when you get your bell rung, stuff happens. So, George Zimmerman, a little after midnight, the police make the call. The call is this: we're not going to keep you at the police department. We're not going to arrest you yet. We're going to sort this out first. He had the injuries, the pictures, the statement, the diagrams. So they decided to let him go home. So he did. He and his wife, Shelley, and their friend, Mark Osterman, went home to Mark Osterman's house, as I recall. Mark Osterman is the federal air marshal that I mentioned, who has been a licensed law enforcement officer forever. He's the guy that rides on the plane, undercover, if you will. So that happens a lot, by the way. There's lots of federal air marshals on the planes that we take in light of the horrors that we've experienced with air disasters. So, George Zimmerman decides to go to work the next day to tell them that he wasn't going to be able to go to work. His wife, Shelley, had attended to some of his injuries. She was a nursing student. The swelling had gone down, bandaged it up, and Mr. Zimmerman went to work to check in. He worked at the time and had worked for a while at a company called Digital Risk. Pretty big company. In fact, they're huge now. They do loan investigations or forensic examinations of loans. I don't understand it, but I think what happens is if there are defaulted loans, they ask this company to look into it and see if there's any obvious monkey business. Was there monkey business by the applicant or maybe by the mortgage company? And see if there's something that they can do to back out of someone having to pay off this defaulted loan. So that's what he was doing. It was a paperless job, lots of people working around him, and he liked them, they liked him, they cared for him. Remarkably, none of them knew he had a gun, except for one guy that used to be a police officer. And he went in. When he was seen by Laura Williamson, she was stunned at his appearance. She described him as emotionally and physically beaten. He tried to tell her a little bit about what happened, and he was crying. He teared up. She was powerfully moved by that. He was waiting to talk with Ron Driggers. Ron Driggers was the HR person that Mr. Zimmerman wanted to talk with to say, I've been in this event, I'm going to the doctor. Mr. Driggers also saw the injuries, the black eyes. You know, that doesn't happen immediately. The black eyes, all of that stuff that was going on, bandages and such. And Mr. Zimmerman then did go to the doctor. He went to the Altamont family practice and spoke with a physician's assistant that had seen him, named Lynn Folgate. Mr. Guy mentioned her. And she examined him. She thought the nose was probably broken, although there wasn't a clear septal deviation. There was no urgent need to see an ENT, but she recommended it. She noted the lacerations and noted some back injury. Mr. Zimmerman had mentioned that he had fallen on his back or was knocked to the ground and hurt his back. And such. They didn't have an x-ray machine there suitable for the nose, so no x-ray was taken. It was suggested, as I mentioned, that he go to see an ENT. He didn't. He continued to heal and continued to cooperate. In fact, later that day, he met with the Sanford Police Department for this video reenactment that you've heard about. And the next day, and as many times as they asked. I said that we would talk about the physical evidence in the case. Well, we've already talked about some physical evidence, but let's talk a little more about the forensic evidence. While witnesses can certainly be...
A good time to take a recess. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for lunch. Lunch is waiting back there for you, and we will be back. It is at 1:30 to proceed. In the meantime, if you'll please put your notes face down on the chairs, Deputy Jarvis will collect them and lock them up during our lunch break. During the lunch recess, please do not discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. You may follow Deputy Jarvis back into the jury room.
But you're okay?
Of the witnesses' issues, so please be prepared to do that. Court will be in recess until 1:30.
If everybody can slide over that way, half a step.
Be prepared to do that. Court will be in recess until 1:30.